Do you ever feel like your children don't respect you anymore? You've spent years sacrificing for them, giving them everything, yet now they ignore your advice, talk down to you, or even make you feel like a burden. It's frustrating, isn't it? But here's the truth: getting angry won't fix it. In fact, it often makes things worse. The good news? You can rebuild their respect without conflict. In this video, I'll share 6 powerful shifts that will change your relationship with your children forever. Let's get started. 1. Stop chasing their approval. Many parents, in their desire to be loved and appreciated by their children, fall into the trap of constantly seeking their approval. They say yes to everything, avoid conflict, and over-accommodate their children's needs, believing this will make them happy. But in reality, this approach teaches children one harmful lesson: your needs don't matter. Take Margaret, for example. She was a devoted mother who always put her children's happiness above her own. If they wanted something, she gave it to them. If they misbehaved, she avoided confrontation. If they made unreasonable demands, she complied. She believed that by doing so, her children would appreciate and love her more. But instead of gratitude, she received entitlement. Her children stopped listening, dismissed her efforts, and took her kindness for granted. One day, Margaret reached a breaking point. She realized she was exhausted, emotionally drained, and felt invisible in her own home. That's when she made a change. She stopped chasing their approval and started valuing herself. She began setting healthy boundaries, saying no when necessary, and prioritizing her own well-being. At first, her children resisted, but over time, something remarkable happened. They started respecting her. They listened more, appreciated her efforts, and even became more responsible themselves. The lesson? Your worth is not defined by how much you sacrifice for others. Seeking constant validation, even from your children, only diminishes your own self-respect. When you prioritize yourself, set firm, yet loving boundaries, and stop fearing their disapproval, you teach your children a far more valuable lesson. Self-respect is non-negotiable, and in the end, that is what fosters true love and respect in any relationship. 2. Don't argue, lead by example. Many parents believe that engaging in arguments with their children is a way to assert authority and prove a point. But in reality, arguing does the opposite. It weakens authority and creates unnecessary conflict. When parents engage in heated debates with their children, they unknowingly place themselves on the same level, making it easier for their kids to challenge their authority rather than respect it. Take Frank, for example. He was a father who often found himself in verbal battles with his teenage son. Every conversation turned into an argument, and no matter how much he insisted that he was right, his son only pushed back harder. Frank felt frustrated, unheard, and disrespected. One day, he decided to change his approach. Instead of raising his voice or arguing back, he started speaking with quiet confidence. He set clear expectations, remained calm during conflicts, and most importantly, let his actions set the example. He showed patience, responsibility, and respect in his own behavior, things he wanted his son to learn. What happened? His son started listening. Over time, he began mirroring his father's calm demeanor, responding with more respect, and challenging him less. Without the back-and-forth arguments, their relationship improved, and Frank's authority became stronger, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. The lesson? Respect isn't gained through words. It's built through presence and example. Children learn more from what they see than what they hear. When parents model the values they want to instill, self-control, patience, and confidence, children naturally follow. Instead of arguing, be the example they look up to. In the end, actions speak far louder than words. 3. Your happiness should not depend on them. Many parents, often without realizing it, make their children responsible for their emotional well-being. They seek constant validation from them, expecting love, appreciation, and reassurance in return for their sacrifices. But paradoxically, the more parents depend on their children for emotional fulfillment, the more distant those children often become. Helen, a single mother, learned this lesson the hard way. She dedicated her entire life to her kids, believing that their happiness was her happiness. But over time, she started relying on them for emotional support, seeking their approval, hoping for gratitude, and feeling hurt when they didn't acknowledge her efforts. The more she leaned on them, the more they pulled away. Her children, overwhelmed by the pressure of being her source of happiness, became distant and disengaged. One day, Helen had a realization. Her happiness was her own responsibility. She decided to stop making her children the center of her emotional world and started focusing on herself. She pursued hobbies she had long neglected, reconnected with old friends, and started living for herself, not just for them. She found joy in her own growth and self-care. Something unexpected happened. Her children started valuing her presence more. They began seeing her as a fulfilled and independent person rather than someone emotionally dependent on them. Their relationship improved, not because she demanded their attention, but because she no longer needed it to feel whole. The key takeaway? Your happiness should never depend on your children. When you prioritize your own well-being, you set a powerful example for them. You show them what it means to be emotionally strong, self-sufficient, and fulfilled. And in turn, they will respect and cherish you even more. Number 4, set and enforce boundaries. Boundaries are essential in any relationship, especially between parents and children. When parents allow disrespectful behavior without consequences, they unintentionally teach their children that it's acceptable. Without clear limits, kids may grow up believing they can act however they want without accountability. Take Robert, for example. He wanted to be the cool parent, so he let things slide. When his children spoke rudely to him, he ignored it. When they broke house rules, he let them off the hook. He thought that by being lenient, his children would love and appreciate him more. But instead, the opposite happened. They lost respect for him. They stopped taking his words seriously, disregarded his authority, and began testing his limits more and more. One day, Robert realized that his kindness was being mistaken for weakness. He decided to make a change. He set firm but fair boundaries, clear rules and expectations, along with consistent consequences for disrespectful behavior. If his kids spoke rudely, there was an immediate consequence. If they broke the rules, privileges were taken away. He enforced these boundaries calmly but firmly, without unnecessary anger or guilt. At first, his children resisted, but over time, something shifted. They started respecting him more, listening to him, and even appreciating the structure he provided. The discipline he implemented didn't drive them away. It actually strengthened their relationship because they now knew what to expect. The lesson? Don't tolerate disrespect. When you set and enforce boundaries, you teach your children an important life lesson. Respect is non-negotiable. Boundaries create a sense of security and structure, showing them that actions have consequences. And in the end, that's what helps build mutual respect and a stronger parent-child bond. 5. Stop giving without appreciation. Parents naturally want to provide for their children, often giving without expecting anything in return. However, when generosity is met with entitlement instead of gratitude, it can create an unhealthy dynamic where children take their parents' efforts for granted. Love should be unconditional, but that doesn't mean parents should tolerate ingratitude. Take George, for example. He worked hard to give his children everything they needed and more. Whenever they asked for something, he provided it without hesitation. He thought that by giving freely, he was being a good father. But over time, he noticed a troubling pattern. His kids stopped saying thank you. They demanded things instead of asking. They expected more without appreciating what they already had. At first, George brushed it off, believing they would eventually realize his sacrifices. But then he had a realization. By constantly giving without requiring appreciation, he was reinforcing entitlement. So he decided to make a change. The next time his children expected something without gratitude, he said, no, not out of anger, but to teach them a lesson about value and appreciation. At first, his children were frustrated, but soon, something remarkable happened. They started noticing all that he had done for them. They became more grateful, more mindful, and more respectful. Instead of expecting things as a given, they began to appreciate the effort behind every gift and every act of kindness. The takeaway? Giving is beautiful, but when it's taken for granted, it loses its meaning. Parents should teach their children that generosity is not an obligation, it's an act of love. When children learn to value and appreciate what they receive, they grow into more grateful, respectful, and responsible individuals. 6. Build a life outside them. Children don't respect neediness, they respect strength and purpose. Eleanor had spent her entire life revolving around her kids. But once they grew up, they hardly acknowledged her. She felt lost until she started rediscovering herself. She took up new hobbies, traveled, and pursued passions she had once set aside. And guess what? Her children started admiring her again. When you have a life beyond parenting, your children respect you not just as a parent, but as a person. Conclusion: respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you earn by valuing yourself first. When you stop chasing approval, lead by example, set boundaries, and build a fulfilling life outside of your children, they will naturally start respecting you again. Which of these 6 steps resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more insights on family and relationships. Remember, your children will mirror the respect you show yourself. It's time to take that first step